welcome back to another episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast. Hey, have you gone to MrProductivity.com yet? M-I-S-T-E-R, MrProductivity.com. Sign up for my free email newsletter. Whole bunch of other good stuff. It's all there at MrProductivity.com. On the show today, Rocky Romanella. He is a seasoned business leader with over 40 years of executive experience, including roles as president of UPS Supply Chain Solutions and CEO of Unitech Global Services. Drawing from his extensive career, Rocky is now an author, speaker, consultant, sharing his insights on balanced leadership through his book, Tighten the Lug Nuts, and founder of 360 Management Services. Rocky, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be on your show again, Mr. Productivity.
It's been a while.
Productivity. It's been a while. I know.
Long time.
Hey, you're working on no hair. I'm working on gray hair. You can tell the time, right?
Listen, I'm 59 years young, and I'm in such denial of being 59 that the reason why I look like I'm in my mid-40s is I shave the gray. I shave the goatee, the beard, the hair. I shave everything off, so that's why I look so young. So,
well, listen, I'm 67.
Wow.
So now my biggest concern is we're in the fourth quarter. I just hope we're not at the 2-minute warning. We're at the beginning of the fourth quarter. That's all I'm worried about right now.
I believe I've been doing a lot of research on health and wellness, and I believe we're getting really close to escape velocity of longevity. And so I'm a daily runner, and I fully anticipate running at least 1 mile on my 110th birthday. And so I think if we take care of ourselves, I think it's no longer 80, 82 years old. You can live to 110 and be active, which is important, because I don't want to live 110 and be in an oxygen tank getting moved. I want to be able to be an active part of human life.
Yeah, you want to live life to its fullest at whatever age you're at. Absolutely.
100%. So 2 questions for you. We started talking about this before we press record. You must hear Adrian all the time.
Actually, the truth be told, my poor wife Debbie hears Adrian all the time. Yes, we do, certainly. And then the other question you always get asked, is that your real name? And of course, my real name is Rocco, but that's the nickname for Rocco is Rocky.
Ah, okay. So you don't make quite the amount of money that Sylvester Stallone makes.
No, not even close. Although I have been punched around a lot with the different jobs I've had. When you're in business or whatever you do, whatever responsibility you have, you're on the ropes. Everybody gets on the ropes once or twice.
His story, if people don't know the story of Sylvester Stallone, he was almost at rock bottom, sold his dog because he's really committed to the Rocky movie. And as they say, the rest is history. What a story. If you really want to know where this guy came from, he was almost like the plane was plummeting toward the ground. And the movie Rocky, he pulled up on the throttle, and the rest is history. An incredible story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get a chance now to work with a lot of small business owners, and it's amazing how many of them, while maybe not as dramatic as you just described, many of them, I should say, have that story of where, okay, they had their credit cards on max, they're rolling the payment process, wondering if it's time to move on. Maybe this dream isn't going to happen. Something changes, something clicks, and then the business takes off, or they pivot, like many businesses did during post-COVID. I think that story of that entrepreneur and how they pivoted or how they moved on is such a great story. And I think the movie and Sylvester Stallone is certainly, the symbol of all those hardworking entrepreneurs.
I think there's something to be said with almost being at your wit's end and maxing out your credit card, and you're running out of your checking and your savings, and you have no 401k because you're a solopreneur. Because when I first started my journey in July 2005, after I was fired from my corporate job, I had money in the credit card, had money in the bank. It's like I made stupid mistakes by hiring coaches that I didn't vet. It's not their fault. It's my fault. I invested in courses because I thought just any course would make me a millionaire. And it wasn't until it got really difficult that I started taking it seriously. See, when you got a big safety net behind you, it's, who cares? But when you're like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to feed my family? How am I going to put gas in the car? Now you look at what you do every day, totally different than when you have a safety net. Will you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. In fact, I often tell the story that my respect for that small business owner, that entrepreneur, is amazing. I have such utmost respect for them. And to be frank with you, I'm not sure I could do that. And my reasoning is this. I had MBE when UPS purchased it, and then we rebranded to the UPS store, 100% franchisee owned. And so I got a chance to meet some of the greatest entrepreneurs, those individuals. And to me, nobody's more all in than an entrepreneur. If you think about it, they take everything, as you just suggested, everything they own in the world, everything they got, they slide it across the table, and that's when they say, hey, I'm all in. Right, I'm going to start this business. And if you think about it, when you're working for a major corporation or when you're working for a much larger organization, you may miss your business plan, but somebody else may make it. And so you may have, in theory, a P&L responsibility, but you don't have that P&L all in as a small business owner. And what always really moved me or stuck with me was this whole concept of literally at the end of the day, an entrepreneur hits the cash register, the drawer opens, they pay their people, they pay their vendors, and what's left in that cash register is what they take home for their family. That to me is the greatest definition of all in. And that's the reason why I have such great respect for them as entrepreneurs and business owners.
Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur or a solopreneur?
An entrepreneur in the sense of, to me, an entrepreneur is also someone who I think can think outside the box, someone that is looking to where the puck is going, not to where the puck has been. So I think that when you combine that with if you're the sole proprietor, if you're just a one person at the beginning and then you're expanding, I think it's those two qualities I think that make that entrepreneurial spirit. And because I'll tell you, the trick in a franchise network, for example, is you want the franchisee to have that entrepreneurial spirit, but they have to work within the confines of a network, right? A store in Portland, Oregon has to have the same products and services and conduct the business the same way that the store owner in Portland, Maine. The key is you incent or you inspire their entrepreneurial spirit, but they have to do it within the confines of a franchise organization. And that's the trick of managing an excellent franchise network.
Yeah, so I was a solopreneur from '05 until about a year ago, and my wife decided to quit her job and come work with me in the business. And then I thought I was an entrepreneur. I happened to connect with a coach. He says, no, you're not an entrepreneur. Just because your wife works for you, you're still a solopreneur because I'm the brand. I am Mr. Productivity.
Yes.
And the only difference is I do everything that's content creation. I'm the face of the business. When I get done with this podcast, she takes care of everything else. She edits it. She puts it up on Spotify and YouTube and does everything else. So I still think myself as a solopreneur. And the number one thing I get from people who are in the corporate world, and they make, man, you're so lucky. I'm like, what do you mean I'm lucky? Man, you could do whatever you want to do. Because I'm a big European football fan. We call it soccer in the United States, but I love European football. And so sometimes my team is on during the week. And I will watch those games live and people go, you're so lucky. I said, no, you don't understand. First of all, I get up at 4:30 in the morning and I work up until kickoff time, which is 2 o'clock Central Time. So yeah, I get to watch those games, but if I'm not working, I'm not making money. If you're in a corporate world, and there's nothing wrong with being in the corporate environment, nothing at all. But let's face it, you're going to have good days, like when you're super productive, and you're going to have days where, you know what, you don't feel like doing much, but there's another department, another teammate that's pulling where you're shorting, they're pulling up and doing more. When you're a solopreneur, if I'm not working, who's reaching out to my niche on LinkedIn? Who's creating content? Who's creating podcasts? And so, yes, we do have the freedom, but I work 7 days a week, not because I have to, but because I love what I'm doing so much. So do I work on Christmas? Yeah, for an hour or two, because I want to. No one's saying I have to. But the thing is, I'm not Walmart. I'm not Amazon. People don't wake up and go, you know what? I want to be more productive today and go to my website. That's not the reality. Correct?
Oh, no. And I agree with you 100%. And as I mentioned before, when that cash register opens, there has to be money in there. And that's the whole revenue expense kind of thing. And it's all of us, whether we're a sole proprietor or the independent business person or a major corporation, it really comes down to what I call the jaws of life, right? Revenue up, expenses down. But the jaws of death are revenues down, but there's still expenses, or the expenses are going up, and that's the jaws of death, right? And so as a sole person, you've got all this equipment, you're out there advertising for your business, and you're trying to work social media, you've got graphics that you're doing. At the end of the day, there's expense associated with all of that. And as you said, if you're not growing the business or doing the things you need to drive revenue, it's going to come to the jaws of death, right? It's going to come to the cash register open, and then there's nothing in it. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on those individuals. And that's why I said I have the greatest respect for those individuals who start businesses, run businesses, try to grow businesses.
The question I ask my fellow solopreneurs, they may be brand new and they're like, hey, I'm going to go out and pay for Notion, or I'm going to go out and pay for Canva, or I'm going to pay. And I always ask them one question: why? I need to get a VA. Why? You have no income. So this is a crazy idea, Rocky. If you have no income, you should really minimize your expenditures. Is that a crazy statement or what?
Hey, you're just working yourself towards the jaws of death faster than necessary, no? But I will say one thing, though, that in regards to this. There's a lot of similarities in small business ownership and large corporations, the way they're run, right? And there's the good things that happen and the bad. But I'll tell you that what's common, the common denominator is in small businesses, you tend to put expense ahead of revenue. In big businesses, you put expense ahead of revenue. It's the difference between the nice to do things and the need to do things. And I don't know why a small business owner struggles with that. It's differentiating the difference. And large corporations is running rampant, right? Because the nice to do things, every function in your organization has a nice to do thing they want to do. Mm-hmm. But small business owners sometimes, as you said, struggle for that. The newest technology thing or the newest platform or whatever it is. And the key is you never put expense ahead of revenue. I know some people say that's an investment. Yeah, there's investments that you made, but you made one already when you slid everything across the table and you set them all in. Nobody said you had to have an iPhone 17, 18, 22. The iPhone 8 works really good, right? It's not a crap thing. And why do you got to get 16 for it?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the iPhone because I'm an Apple fanboy. I'm an Apple fanboy nut. And this past week, now we're recording this for context, is September 11th. I think it'll be out sometime in a few weeks, whatever. But I actually turned off the keynote that Apple had in September because when they introduced like the new Apple Watch and they start talking about colors, that's not going to be an upgrade. And they did the same thing with the iPhone. Everything's colors. When you start talking about different colors and textures, you're like, okay, I have an iPhone 13 Pro Max. It works gorgeous. It takes 4K videos. The battery lasts all day. So I ignored the upgrade to the 14, 15, and I'm not going to get the 16. Why? There's no point. I have an Apple Watch Ultra 1. It works great. And I think taking this over to business, it's not just solopreneurs. So if you are in a corporate world, maybe you're a department manager, maybe you're a VP of operations, before you spend money, you need to go, wait, time out, stop. Why do we need to die? And I think I see this as almost like a pandemic. Everybody wants to spend money to get the latest and greatest, but the thing you have is working. So now if you have a piece of software and it's no longer supported, that's not what I'm talking about. But if what you have works and it's supported, why do you want to get the new thing? Why do you think people, especially in corporate America, why do they always want to get the latest and greatest thing when what they have already does what they wanted to do?
I think it's because, let's give them the benefit of the doubt, but I think it's because everybody believes it's some competitive advantage that they need. But I think what you're saying, I think it is so rational that it doesn't make sense to people. So if you think about it for a second, now we're showing our age here, but all right, so when we had our Motorola flip phone and you got the notice, hey, you're ready for an upgrade. The upgrade then was you bring an old razor and you get a new one and you walk out with spending no money. Maybe you got a new case.
Right.
Well, today when they tell you you're ready for an upgrade, that's code for we're going to give you the right and privilege to spend another $1,200. And we're going to do it over the course of 2 years with no interest, but it's $1,200. This isn't the upgrade like you and I are used to. Oh, we got a new razor. I paid the $30 for the new, whatever it was, the new plug-in or whatever. That's when you really got to take a step back and say, wait a second, I got a perfectly good phone, as you said, and I'm going to go spend another $1,200 to upgrade it so that the cameras. That's where you start to scratch your head. You're like, come on, we're smarter than this.
Yeah. I think I had the iPhone 11 and I upgraded to the iPhone 13 Pro Max only because it had better cameras and you could do 4K on the rear facing camera and 1080p, which is H on the FaceTime camera. And that's it. Other than that, now people say, why do you get the Pro Max? I only can see out of one eye. So I need the bigger screen so I can see the phone. But like I said, I bypassed 14, 15. I'm going to bypass 16 because what I have works now. I don't understand that. And I think I want people both professionally and personally, before you buy the next greatest thing, ask yourself why. As I said, I invested in the coach and he puts all his things on Notion. Now, I caught myself for a second because I had to go get a Notion account. And I'm like, oh, should I upgrade? I'm like, wait, are you going to use Notion? The answer is no. I'm using Notion for his thing. So why would I want to go out and upgrade? It's that tempting because they go, if you do it now, you get 50% off for a year. And then after that, you pay $1 million. But I just want people to use that powerful question of why do I want to upgrade? Why do I want to buy the software? Why do I want to send my employees to this exotic island when I can send them to maybe a hotel close to the home where I don't have to pay for airfare? Just ask that question. If we would spend more time asking the question why, I think we could save a lot of money, time, and aggravation.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think if you think about those three, time, money, and aggravation, to me, it all boils down to, I talk a lot about this when it gets asked about work-life balance or spending or different things like that. It all comes down to me by putting things into two categories. Is this a nice to do thing or is it a need to do thing? And unfortunately, we all love to do the nice to do things. To think about work-life balance, how many things that you do are nice to do? It's great that you're doing it. It's wonderful that you're doing it. But over here's a need to do thing. We got to do this to keep the business going. I've got to go visit that key customer, or I've got to understand why that customer churned. But over here, there's a great event that they're going to a ball game with some happy customers. Okay, that's a great event, and you've got the appropriate people going. But you're going to that instead of maybe missing time with your family at a nice to do thing when, the need to do thing may have been to go home to the kids or whatever. So the nice to do and need to do columns to me are always important when it comes to spending, when it comes to time management, when it comes to productivity, when it comes to your priorities. Is this a need to do priority or a nice to do priority? And that's what I think people always get themselves bogged down with the nice to do. What's so nice to do? I get it. We like to do those things, but you got to do the need to do things, man. If we need to do it, we need to do it.
For the longest time, I wanted to be filthy rich. I'm not filthy rich at this point, but I always wanted to be rich. And people used to ask me, why? There's that question again. Why? And then I heard something Grant Cardone said, which I'll never forget. He says, the whole point of becoming really rich is so you can help a lot of people. That clicked for me because I had no reason. I wanted to have a lot of money. I don't know why, but now if you're broke, you can't help people. But when you're really wealthy, then you can help people. So my why is to make a lot of money so I can help a lot of less fortunate people. Now I've answered that question, why? And I ask people when they tell me, I want to become really rich. Why? I want to buy a private plane. Okay, why? And I get annoying to people. They're like, why do you keep asking the question? I'm like, first of all, you just used the word I'm asking you. But second of all, your life is all about the question, why am I taking care of myself? Because I want to run on my 110th birthday. I think if you can dig into your why, and I think you can have multiple whys. You should have one big why, but you should have other whys. Why am I going to go to McDonald's today? Why am I going to go to the movies? Why am I going to shop at this store instead of this store? And I think people are just on autopilot, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this. I think people are on autopilot. They're doing this because they see other people doing it, or they've always done it, or their family's done it, or their employees do it, or their former company did it, but they're not like, why am I doing it? What say you on that?
I think you've articulated it well. There's 20% of the people who are the early adopters, the trailblazers to get out ahead of people. And then there's 20% of the people, no matter what you do, they're not participating, right? They're in there, they're going to, but then that 60% in the middle are those individuals who are good people, most likely very good employees or people in your care that you're working with, but they tend to move, right, in the direction. And I think that they're seeing people that they respect or people that are doing well, and they're just trying to emulate those things. I take a little different thought on that, especially when it comes to people as leaders, as individuals. I always ask the question, like I get the opportunity to do junior seniors in high school, junior seniors in college, and talk a little bit about their vision of where they're trying to go, who they're trying to be, what do they stand for as individuals. And I always come down to the question, what's the word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? So what's that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? And it's funny, almost to your point. So you throw that out to the group you're with and you get aggressive, energetic, integrity. Some will say rich. In fact, usually when you're in college, that's one of the big words, rich. I'd like to... And some may not say rich in terms of 10 richest people in the world, but not to have to worry about money is probably a better kind of way that the vast majority of people get to. But then when you say to them, so that's the word you want on the left, that's it. It will describe you at the end of your career, right? That's what's on your tombstone, rich. No, not really. And I think for me personally, to me, the word was thoughtful. I wanted to be a thoughtful leader. I wanted to be a person that looked at things from its widest consequences. And I think that if you come up with that word, you may not always be successful, but without realizing it, you're building a mosaic to that word. So everything you do in your career and your life, you do it in a thoughtful manner for me, right? Because that's the word. That's who I want it to be, right? If you're aggressive, then you're probably going to be that person that's 150 miles an hour with their hair on fire, the bull in a china shop, or you're the person that wants to make the quick decision and be applauded for that. Integrity. It doesn't mean that you don't do other things, but that's who you are, what you stand for, and what you won't compromise as an individual, as a company. And I think that's what I think speaks to your brand, speaks to who you are. And I think if people took the time to understand that word, that's what speaks about them, I think a lot of the whys, would be different answers to them, right? Because a thoughtful person is not really worried about, do they have the most toys, or are they doing this, or are they always first in line, or whatever. And I think that you have to first understand who you are as an individual. And once you do, then it starts to change the dynamic of how you address other people, how you interact with other people, how you conduct yourself, especially in the most difficult times. And I think that's another good way I think the why is a good way of doing it, and also that understanding that word that describes you and how you are building that mosaic to that word.
I recently went to a coaching boot camp with an individual, and the way they taught how you put your plan together was amazing. They said, first of all, it starts with the vision. And very few people have visions. You may have a vision if you are in the corporate world, but do you have a personal vision? And after vision comes purpose. Why are you here? And the third thing he talks about is principles. Now, I had never heard anyone talk about vision, purpose, and principles before. He goes, without the vision, you can't have purpose. Without the purpose, you can't have principles, because they feed off each other. Most people, again, they're on autopilot. Okay, what do I have to do today to get to 5 o'clock so I can go home and watch YouTube or scroll on TikTok? They don't have any clarity. They're just going through the motions. And I tell people, you get one shot at this thing called life, and you need to ask yourself, why am I here? Because I believe everyone is here for a reason. Now, you may not know what your reason is at this point, but I promise you, no one is a wasted human being. No matter where you live, what language you speak, what color your skin is, you are here for a reason. And I just encourage people, if they have no idea what their vision is, or what a vision even is, or what their purpose is, then go do some research. Go get a book. If you can't afford the book, go to the library, go borrow it from your friend. But really dig deep, whether you're 20 or 60. Figure out what is your vision? What do you want to accomplish in your life? And I think a lot of people, because they're very passive, they're very autopilot, they get to the end of their life and they're like, man, what did I accomplish? We all know those people. I know a lot of people in their 90s and they're just like, what did I do with my life? Because they were on autopilot and lived their life passively. And I think if they would have taken a few minutes and go, what do I want to accomplish? I think their life may have turned out differently than it did.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why, and I agree 100% with you. And that's the challenge I always offer to myself, the challenge I always put out to the organizations I work with. And when I was managing day-to-day operations, what I would challenge my people, those three key words. And I think the three key questions, I should say, and companies need to do this as well. I think the same three questions work for companies, organizations, as it does for individuals. And I think it matches up with the three words you just said. And the first one is, who am I? That's the vision, right? What do I stand for? And then number three is probably the one that gets everybody in trouble. You and I could think of corporations all over the place, 150-year corporations that clearly could articulate who we are. They had posters all over the place, all billboards, what we stand for. Everybody had marketing, everybody had. But number three is what always gets you in trouble. What won't we compromise? Mm-hmm. And see, that's what gets people in trouble, and that's what gets companies in trouble. Number three. You could say that safety is a core value in our organization, and we won't work unsafely. We care so much about our people that we won't let them work unsafe. So there you got who we are, what we stand for. Okay, you get a phone call, and you have one more delivery to make, or you have one more part to one more thing to build, or whatever it is. Person's out of hours. It's been a long day. That's it. One more part. Come on, we can get this thing done. Maybe you send the person who just started 2 hours ago and say, hey, you drive a car, right? Can you go take this over there? You're compromised. That's the compromise. Maybe it doesn't hurt you day one, but you're setting a precedent that you will compromise the things that you said you wouldn't compromise. So everybody has to clearly understand who we are, what we stand for, and what we won't compromise. Companies and people. And I tell you, the challenge is always going to be number three. What won't I compromise? And if you think about companies that have got themselves in trouble that were household names, it was always number three. It's what they compromised.
I remember when Steve Jobs returned to Apple after he got ousted and started next and came back, the first thing he did is he looked at all the products that Apple had. And he goes, this is not who we are.
There you go.
Why do we have 850 types of laptops? So he pared it down, 3 sizes of the MacBook Air, 3 sizes of the MacBook Pro, because when you have too many options, then you start watering down why you're there. And so a lot of gold in this episode already. We're only halfway through it. But I got to ask you, Tighten the Lug Nuts. That is a very interesting title of a book. So give us, before we talk about what it is, where did you come up with that title? Because it really, you ever hear that title, you're like, I got to check this book out, because just the title alone.
So the book is written in a third person by a person by the name of Joe Scafone. How I came up with Joey. How I came up with Joe Scafone was some years ago. You're sitting at a meeting and somebody brings you a new product, a service, or a new idea. And I found, like, when they brought it to you and you would say, oh, that's a good idea, Mark, but what about this? And I always felt like the what about this always made him feel like, oh, maybe he doesn't think it's a good idea. And it was never that. For me, it was always challenging people in a positive way, not to stop at the first right answer. So I would say to you, hey, Mark, that's a really good idea, but you think Joe Scafone thinks that's a good idea? And we'd all chuckle, but it was my way of challenging them in a positive way. And the book then was written in that third person, because I never liked the thought of I did this or I did that, or I think you should look at this. And so so each chapter is a management or a leadership lesson, but it's written in a story form. So one of the stories in the book is this concept of tightening the lug nuts. And simply put, without telling you the story, is if you're walking by a vehicle and, Mark, you say to me, hey, Rocky, that lug nut's loose over there. Looks like it's loose. Takes me 5 minutes to go tighten it. But I get distracted. Somebody calls me. Somebody asks me to do something that seems much more important, and I move on to that next thing. Then 2 days later, somebody calls and says, hey, by the way, we got a vehicle that I think the front wheel is shimmering. So when lug nuts are loose, they're important. But when you don't tighten them at that moment, they become urgent. We can only handle so many things in our life as individuals, especially as leaders. You can only handle so many urgent things. So don't let important things become urgent. Tighten your lug nuts.
I love that analogy because whether you're a solopreneur, you are an HR professional, you're in the corporate world in some other role, you have a job to do. You have a goal you're trying to accomplish, a daily goal, weekly goal, a monthly goal, a quarterly goal, a yearly goal. And you got to be very careful not to get distracted. It's really easy to work on things that are not moving the needle. I call this by a really strange name, procrastination, because if your goal is X and you have to do 1, 2, 3 to get you to X by the end of the week, every activity you do, you have to ask yourself, am I on task or off task? Now, newsflash, you cannot be 100% on task because we're humans. All right, we're not robots. You're going to get distracted. Someone's going to come by, knock on your door. There's going to be an impromptu, someone celebrating their birthday. Maybe the power goes out. So give up any hope of being 100% on task. I would say, this is my personal recommendation. You should spend 80% of your time, a day, a week, a month, a quarter, whatever. 80% of your time should be spent working on tasks that move you forward towards your goals. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I agree. I mean, always trying to advance the ball down the field, and look, occasionally you're going to have a fumble, occasionally you're going to go backwards. But at the end of the day, your intentions should be to move the ball down the field or make progress. And some of that progress may not seem big, but they're foundational pieces that will pay dividends later on. Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. And so the problem then is when you procrastinate or when you leave your lug nuts loose, what ends up happening is you're trying to move the ball down the field, except now you've got to stop and then you got to go all the way back and think about what happens when that happens. And then that supervisor or manager, what's the first thing they say to you? I got no luck. Nothing ever goes my way. I can't believe I got to stop what I'm doing here. I got to go back. And wait a second. Isn't that the loose lug nuts you could have tightened 3 days ago in 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So this has nothing to do with bad luck. This has nothing to do with nothing ever goes your way. This has to go with tighten the lug nuts. You could have done what you could have done in 5 minutes is now taking you off plan for the whole day.
Mm-hmm. I call that the Eeyore complex. I grew up in the age of Winnie the Pooh. Eeyore is the guy who's always saying, it's never going to work out. I'm never going to land that client, whatever. Listen, we love Eeyore, but we don't want to hang around Eeyores. We want to hang around Winnie the Poohs, or if you're brave, Teaker. That's how I identify with annoyingly, optimistically happy. But to me, as a Mr. Productive, tightening the lug nuts is planning. So I don't go into a day and go, what am I going to work on? I'll figure something out. I sit down and I usually do this on Sunday for the whole week. And I go, okay, what do I need to work on tomorrow? So when tomorrow comes, I'm not going, I can't think of anything, so I'll just watch YouTube for a couple hours, or I'm going to go learn about Notion. I'm not going to use Notion, but I heard Notion's great, so I'm going to waste my time doing it. But if you start with a plan, in my eye, and you tell me if you agree with this or not, that's actually, I'm pre-tightening the lug nut. So they may not be loose, but I'm now going through that like a pilot when he takes off. They go through a checklist. So there may not be anything wrong, but they don't assume there's nothing wrong. They go through and they tighten the lug nuts before they take off. Am I tracking with you?
Oh, yeah. Look, hey, failure is a plan to fail. And then what ends up happening is then you start to create, if you don't have a plan and you don't have a concept of what you're trying to accomplish, then you start to build key metrics, a dashboard of elements, and you're actually tracking the wrong elements, but you think you're tracking the right elements because you really don't have a plan, and you certainly don't understand what the results of the plan look like. I always tell the story when we were in high school, we're all going to go to Florida. I grew up in Jersey, so everybody goes spring break. We're all going to Florida. So we got 2 cars. So one group says, all right, we're not going to speed. First one there. Let's see who gets there first. So we got one group that gets a map, figures the whole thing out, and they're driving and they're seeing signs, welcome to Delaware, welcome to South Carolina, and so they're, hey, we're doing good. Then we got the other group over there, we don't need it. We're going south. As long as the car's pointing south, we're going to get there. Next thing you know is they're like, hey, look at this, welcome to Ohio. Yeah, I didn't realize you had no plan. Now, the metrics, you were all checking you're checking your speedometer, we weren't allowed to go over 55, you're checking your gas to make sure you don't run out of gas. Okay, those were all, that was your dashboard. Those are pertinent, but the one you really needed to know was the next one is Delaware, South Carolina, Georgia, not Ohio, Illinois. So I think that besides, I agreeing with everything you're saying, but the added is that you start to build metrics that may be good metrics, but they don't apply to what you're trying to accomplish with the plan, I guess is a better way of putting it.
I have to laugh because when you said maps, I remember those fold-out maps. Now, if you're a younger listener of the show, before we had Apple Maps and Google Maps and Waze, we actually had physical map. Matter of fact, my wife and I were watching the Bourne movies over again, right? So we watched Bourne Identity, which is 2002. And he's in the car driving in Berlin with a paper map. My wife and I go, we remember those days.
I know. You feel like Ram McNally now. I got my map out. I take that when I go on a motorcycle ride. I'll lay everything out the night before if I want to go to someplace new in the state or whatever, and I got the map all laid out. And Debbie just laughs at me. You got a GPS on the bike? I got to put it down. I got to see this thing. I got to visualize where this map's going kind of thing.
Oh, 100%, because the screen is only so big on a phone. I want to know, like when I used to drive to Florida all the time, it was pretty easy. I-10 to Tallahassee, 75 South. I could do it by memory, but that's an easy route. If you're driving up from Houston to my hometown of Rochester, New York, a lot of different twists and turns. And then what if a bridge is out or there's an accident or something and you got to do a detour? If you haven't taken the time to say, okay, here's the general route we're going to go up here, but what if we get sidetracked? Because that happened. What if your car has problems? You have to pull off the highway and go to a mechanic. So people, again, because I'm going to say this for the third time today, they're on autopilot. They assume everything's going to happen just like they want it to happen, which is nice, but we don't live in utopia, okay? Things are going to happen. We are humans. The internet's going to drop out right before that important client call. Maybe the power is going to go out, which knocks off your internet. Things are going to happen. Maybe you're about ready to do a once-in-a-lifetime interview with somebody, and then the neighbor decides that's the day they're going to get their roof replaced. Things are going to happen. So I think you have to have a plan, but you also have to give yourself grace and understand, hey, you know what? Things are going to happen. I live on the Gulf Coast. Storms can come. Hurricanes can come. If you're out in California, earthquakes can happen. So the best laid plans can go awry. I love the saying that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. Because, you think that's going to happen? Watch this.
Heard that, but I like that.
Well, it's true because we sit there we get our plans, or I like a whiteboard. I got a whiteboard behind me, or perfect. Here's the perfect plan for me to make $1 million this year, or to have this many clients, or to write my book. You're like, great. It looks good on the whiteboard. It looks good on the Google Sheet. It looks good in the notebook. But the problem is, okay, your kid's going to get sick. Your kid's going to fall at school and break their leg. I remember in October 2017, my wife fell at home and broke her arm. Shocker, that was not my to-do list that day. So for the next 2 weeks, I had to care for my wife. Life is going to happen. I don't care how prepared you are. Life is going to happen. And I think you have to extend yourself grace and go, okay, this is not what I wanted to have happen today, but it happened. What am I going to do now?
No, I agree with you. And I like what people say, I had to call an audible. Okay, an audible means you had a plan, and when you walked to the line of scrimmage, you changed the plan. When you had no plan, then you called a plan. Okay?
I love that.
So don't, you know what I mean? The other thing that used to drive people crazy is they would present to me all the things went wrong, and they would articulate it beautifully, and I would just look at them politely and respectfully and say, I understand all those things. I just don't accept it because you could have done things differently. You have five other people that did not allow those things to get them off plan, to take them that far off that they couldn't accomplish anything. So if I accept what you're telling me, then I'm being disrespectful to those 5 people who made it work. So I just really can't do that. But no, you're right. It's interesting to listen to how people can rationalize. And it's funny, I always talk about this when we talk about empowerment. To me, true empowerment's when people discipline themselves. It's like the old years ago, there was that commercial where the goalie lets the puck in and the coach comes over and the goalie's all upset and the coach gives him a lifesaver and says it's okay. The goalie was upset. You don't need to pile on when the kid's all upset that the puck went in. He's already upset. He's already disciplining himself. Now, when the goalie says, hey, you know what's wrong with the defense? I'm out here like by myself. That's not an empowered person. That's a person you need to have a conversation with, right? They don't need a lifesaver. They need a significant event. Hey, we got to talk about this. This is your area of responsibility. I gave you the authority. It goes with the responsibility. So I think that's the other thing that sometimes people miss is that I'm empowering you and you're disciplining yourself. I can be your cheerleader. It's okay, we'll get through this. But if you're taking no ownership, no responsibility, it's hard. Do you want me to do it for you? How do you want me to do this? I don't understand. And I think that's what gets people in trouble too, is they didn't put together a plan or they didn't tighten their lug nuts. And now all of a sudden you're not accepting any of that responsibility. And so I think they think that, okay, if I give you a good reason, okay, you gave me a good reason, but I don't accept it. You could have taken responsibility. You could have planned. So it's interesting how that happens.
Speaking of planning, I remember back in the day when I used to watch American football. I don't watch it anymore. I'm absolutely addicted to European football now. But I used to be a big fan of the San Francisco 49ers. And when Bill Walsh coached the team, he would always script out the first 20 plays of the game. He didn't care what happened in the game, who they were playing. He would script out the plays. And if the quarterback gets up there and throws the interception, the next play is the play was already scripted. And you wonder why he won so many Super Bowls, because he said, look, I want to set the tempo in the beginning of the game. Now, I don't know if other people do that nowadays. I don't follow American football anymore, but I think that was such a great leadership principle. He created the plan, and whether it worked or didn't work, we're going to work the plan for the first 20 plays. That was it. And it turned out it was very successful. Do you remember when Bill Walsh used to do that?
Oh, all the time. I think almost every coach today in the National Football League scripts out the first 15 or 20 plays. And I think it does two things, too. I think exactly what you said, but also what it does is those are the type of plays that give you indication of other things. How are we blocking? What are the schemes we're going to use? The other thing that Walsh was a genius at was not only having a good plan, having confidence in his plan, but also, hey, I'm going to do it for 20 plays because at that point, I'm probably at the end of the first quarter, or maybe I had the ball 2 or 3 times. It certainly gives me enough time to adjust, but it gives me those indicators how I think this game's going to go today, of how we're going to play, how we're going to execute, and how the other team is going to respond to how we're executing. I think he did a great job. Bill Walsh did something else I thought as a coach that I always admired and always wanted to emulate. It was that he created this system of the way he coached that he always put his people in a position to be successful. He had a vision of how he wanted the game to go, but then depending on who was playing that day. Now, most of the players were the same, but if someone was hurt, he always put his players in a position to be successful. And I remember watching Joe Montana speaking at the time, and he had said, I came out of Notre Dame, I wasn't the highest draft person. Or go take the 49ers today. The 49ers of today are the exact example of the legacy that Walsh started, right? The last player picked in an NFL draft out of college is called Mr. Irrelevant because he's exactly the last player picked. The 49ers pick a few years ago, the last player in the draft was the quarterback that they have today, Brock Purdy. Some injuries happened, and now he's the starting quarterback that's really led them on 3 successful years that he's been the quarterback. And it's because of the system that now Kyle Shanahan. So I think, A, the planning is so important, and the confidence in the plan and the understanding when to make adjustments. And then B, of putting your people in a position to be successful. And Joe Montana always said, look, when I came out of Notre Dame, nobody thought I was going to be that guy that won all these Super Bowls and had a successful career. But I was fortunate to get picked by the 49ers, and Bill Walsh was the coach because his system fit me perfectly. And I think that's the second thing that a good leader does. The planning, and then also understanding the talent, understanding their people, maybe where they are in their progression, and how he or she puts them in a position to be successful.
If you're not into sports, I do apologize because we're both sports fans. I got to talk about my team, Man City, out of the Premier League, because their coach is Pep Guardiola. He is the premier coach, not because he's in the Premier League. He is the premier coach. He has a way of putting the right guys in the right position. And people go, what if he leaves? They could keep on winning. I said, no, because Pep's not there. Okay. And they were so desperate. We've won 7 of the 8 league titles in the last 7 of the last 8 titles, because he can look at the players and know exactly where to put everybody. If you take him out and put Mr. Productivity in there, they won't win the title because I'm not Pep. He analyzes the game. And people say, how does football/soccer? It's just like kicking a ball. There's a plan. Believe me, if you watch it enough, there's a plan. But my point is, I remember once watching one game, you're allowed 5 substitutions in a football game, soccer, depending what word to use. In one game, they won. At the end of the game, one of the fans yelled down to him, why didn't you use any of your subs? He goes, who am I going to sub out? They're all playing great. It's an option to do subs. You don't have to use subs. But he's a genius, and that's why Manchester City doesn't want to let him go, because why would you want to let go one of the best coaches in the history of the sport? You'd be crazy. So now we don't have trading deadlines in the Premier League. We have transfer windows. So in September and in January, teams can transfer to different leagues. While the owners of Man City has given him $100 million war chest for January, they believe in him. Now, if they didn't believe in him as a leader, they're like, yeah, we're not giving you more money. They trust him. And this goes back to leadership in the corporate world. If you are the leader, if your people don't trust you, you can forget about the vision and the principles and the purposes, the mission statements. It doesn't matter, because it's got to start with the leader, and they've got to be able to trust you. You cannot be a dictator. You've got to be, hey, I am the leader. I'm going to set the tone. And that's why I'm going to make sure I'm going to encourage you to tighten the lug nuts. Why? Because I make sure I tighten my lug nuts every day. And so I think a good leader, they realize it's got to start with them. I remember working for leaders who thought it was all about them, and they would say, do as I say, not as I do. That's not how it works, because people are watching what you do. So if you say get there early and stay late, and you come in late and leave early, or like when the cat's away, the mice will play.
But when people believe what you do as a leader stems from an honest heart, they'll follow you. And they know you're not going to be perfect, but they have to believe that what you do stems from an honest heart. That's number one. Number two is, it's never about you. It's always about your people. How many meetings have you sat in and someone's sitting there saying, you don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know how much pressure I'm under. You wanted the job. You got promoted. You're in the job. Mm-hmm. And so that turns off people. But I think, to add on to that and just wrap up the conversation, when I started working at UPS, I was a part-timer. I was on load and trailers. I was working my way through college. And my dad said to me, rest his soul, he said to me 2 things. He said, you know what? Whatever they ask you to do, you say yes and thank you. And then you learn your job and learn some more. And that always stuck with me. So UPS had a promotion from within policy. I was fortunate to be in a company like that. And so every time they tapped me on the shoulder and they said to me, okay, we got a new responsibility for you. You're going to get promoted. You're going to Chicago. And I think to myself, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I could do that. But they believed in me before I believed in myself. And that's what bridges the gap, right? So what I learned from those lessons was UPS believed in me well ahead of me believing in myself. So as leaders, and as a coach, you have to believe in your players, your people, in order to bridge that gap. You have to believe in them until they're ready to believe in themselves. Mm-hmm. They just started out. They may not have the confidence yet. They may not have the knowledge yet. But then all of a sudden you get to that break-even point, right, where they've got some experience now, they've got some knowledge. Now you start to back off a little, right? Now, once they got it, they're ready to fly. Now you're on the back. Good job. Keep up the good work. We got it. And I think that, to me, is that lesson that I learned. And I think if you think about how companies sustain excellence over the course of time, Man City, your team you're just talking about, if they understand they're allowed to have their own style when he retires someday, but what he did stemmed from an honest heart. He was a good leader. He believed in those young forwards and backfield people until they were ready to believe in themselves. And that's what I think is so important as a leader. You have to be prepared and willing to believe in your people until they're ready to believe in themselves. And when that happens, that's how you start to get people moving up. And that's how you get people that are just brand new. And that's how you fill that gap, right? You're always having people in different positions. Some are just starting. They need you to believe in them. Some are right at that midpoint, and you can back off a little and you give them a little more responsibility and authority. And then there's that person who's your wise old sage, the veteran. You let them fly. And those three people, those three types of people, or in that progression of and process of learning, they're happening all the time around you. You're just managing it better than anyone else.
That is a perfect way to wrap up this conversation with you. Thank you for that. So people have just watched or listened to you and they're like, I want to find out more about what Rocky's doing in the world. How can they do that?
So the book is Tighten the Lug Nuts. Many of the concepts you and I talked about today are in that book, but it's also the best place to find me, tightenthelugnuts.com, www.tightenthelugnuts.com. There's some good things on there for you. For example, I'm certainly not a podcast host like you are. You're one of the best. You're professional. You're great at it. You're also prepared. But for me, I decided to do this 3 to 5 minute shortcast, I call it, twice a week, and that comes out with a leadership concept. And so it's very helpful. When I was working with small business owners, there were small concepts that they wanted to talk about. And so there's about 125, 130 of these 3 to 5 minute podcasts under the title of Leadership Library Podcast. So all that's on the website, tightenthelugnuts.com. I have a machine shop now that every Wednesday has a tailgate meeting or a meeting with their people, and they play a podcast for 3 minutes, and then they talk about it with the machinist. So I think it's pretty cool that they're doing it that way, and it's useful for people. Certainly, you can buy the book. It's on Amazon. If you need any help with anything, my email address is rockyromanella@gmail.com. But I'd love to help you. I'm doing mostly keynote speaking and training right now. I just got done with a conference last week in Vegas, and I have a few more scheduled.
I appreciate you coming on the show. And what's amazing is you gave us tons of information, things to think about. But what I want to caution the listener, if there's no magic to listening to Rocky talk. You have to take action. Just listening to a podcast, reading his book, it's not magic. The magic is the implementation, because I believe if you go out and buy a self-help book, a business book, whatever, a marketing book, for example, and you read it and then you put it on your shelf and don't do anything, you wasted your money and your time, okay? And you never get those hours back. So please pick one thing that Rocky talked about in the show today, just one thing, and go implement it today. Unless you're listening to us at 10 o'clock at night, to do it tomorrow, but no later. You need to take action. So, Rocky, I appreciate being on the show. Folks, after you go to his website, go to my website, MrProductivity.com, MISTER, MrProductivity.com, and you get a bunch of goodies over there. And that's it. So I'll be back real soon with a brand new episode. Until then, stay productive, but most importantly, stay positive.